Sam's exhibit is a wonderful example of the Hankow China, and I will turn it over to Sam now at this point, and enjoy the program.
Thank you. Mark, is it showing up okay? David? Okay, okay. So thank you very much for for showing up. I'm no competition for Mother's Day, so I know that you can't show up because of that. So good thing they're recording this. So if anybody couldn't make this, they could then view afterwards. So just a big thank you to all the show committee for making this happen. I try to support PIPEX as much as I can, either in terms of judging or sending in exhibits. I've done so for several years now. So, this is extremely rewarding that the judges agrees with my approach. Now, as I have first brought it up, that a lot of you doesn't collect China, and I would make this, instead of a presentation, more like a candid conversation in the sense that I will tell you what I was up against, the problems I have, and the recommendations that I have received before, so I could reach the point where I have and presented to you this particular exhibit as it stands. So this has to go back like 30 years or so, when I start collecting cities, where a lot of the emphasis back when I started collecting was not on postal history, it was on stamps. So I started doing so-called city collections. The first one I had was Canton, and then I had Chiu, and then I have Weihai Wei, and this is the fourth city I'm doing, which is Hankow. So this is an anniversary of sorts, because this particular exhibit, this is the fifth exhibit I have shown on the first time, and it has got a grand. This is also the 20th anniversary and 1 month that the first time my exhibit on the first try got a grand. So this is really rewarding. So I'm the first one to admit that, this is purely luck. Luck in the sense that I have a jury of judges that agrees with me that what I'm doing, they seem to like. So, given another jury, I would have a different mark, and I would not get the grant. So, this is the first thing I have to admit. So now, going back to the preparation of this particular exhibit, all of a sudden in February, I got an email from George saying that you do not have 1 more month. You have only till the end of March to get it submitted. So all of a sudden, this is a brand new exhibit. I thought I had 10 weeks to write it up. And next thing you know, I had 6 weeks. So George, I have never seen an exhibit chair who took so much care that each of his exhibitors get the maximum attention. So I guess, and then a month before that, George then wrote me again and said, Sam, if you can get it done in time, you could withdraw it. And then, because we have exhibits that could be put in place. So I said, no, George. So I know, George was warning me, if you can't get it done, don't send it in. So immediately I shot him 4 frames of my exhibit. So for the next 6 weeks after that, I was like a zombie, where I got up, I start writing, I go to bed, I eat, and so on and so forth. So, and every 3 or 4 days, I would send George 1 frame of my exhibit until it, so it ended a couple of days before the deadline. So again, thanks, George. And, I thank the committee again for allowing me to exhibit. So I have many good friends who are senior judges, and I consult them every time that, I write up an exhibit. Now, one of them is Bill Schultz. And of course, a lot of body knew Bill. He's more like a mentor to me. So once I got my title page up, I shoot, that to Bill, and Bill said, no, 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 no. And he said, just too long, So it goes back to every exhibit I've done today, where, I haven't seen the EEF for this, where the first response would be, Sam, you're just too wordy, breathe, 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 breathe. I've been hit on the head so many times. And Bill come up with this suggestion, Sam, why don't you try to use a points form? And a light bulb lights up, because this is what I tell my undergrad students in the exam. When you're in under the gun in terms of time, don't write a whole paragraph of 10 lines to deliver 3 points. Use 3 lines to deliver 3 points, and I'll give you the marks. So I said, why don't you listen to yourself? So I took a chance. This was the first big chance that I did with this exhibit. And it's the first time I wrote the exhibit in point form. So, and knowing that the judges will probably give me a hell of a time, but I haven't seen the EF, but it seems like they accepted what, I did. So unfortunately, within 10 frames, this is 8 postal administration that I'm trying to present. And with the 8 postal administration, I cannot even put the synopsis, down to 2 pages. I asked George, if I submit a 3-page synopsis, would you then forward it to the judges? And George said, yeah, send me anything, I'll send it to you. So I did as much as I can, the explanation part, in the synopsis. So, and, being a judge, the first thing you look at is the plan on the first page, which I did. And I'm pretty good in numbering it. So, within the 18 chapters you see on the plan here. So the top part of it is 3 or 4 postal administration. Of course, this is a Chinese city, so the Chinese city matter. And the time scope I've chosen is strategic. It wasn't arbitrary, which you would see in later. Now, China did not have a national post until 1897. Before that, there was a trial post office, which is under the custom. So you see the so-called custom post office. And then, there is this animal in the middle, number 3, which is Hankow local post, because at that point in time, before 1897, it is nearly impossible to get mail out of China, especially in an inland city like Hankow. So there is this postal system set up by usually English expat in many of the treaty ports, and Hankow is one of them, which forward mail outside of the system. So I did the first 8 or 9 chapters. Then chapter 10 is the bulk. My thesis of Hankow is that, which I wrote the article 20 years ago, which I call Hankow, a post office that dared to be different. Now, the different part is that from 1906 onwards, they were experimenting with one of the cancels, actually several of the cancels, and therefore I spent a bit of time explaining that in chapter 10 and chapter 11. There was 2 significant, in the time scope that I've chosen, there is 2 significant events that I have to cover. One was, of course, the Xinhai Revolution. For those who know, this was the end of the dynasty and the formation of the Republic of China. By sheer coincidence, well, I shouldn't say by sheer coincidence, Hankow was a location where the first successful revolution, or the revolution becomes successful, is the 9th, so this is really relevant to my topic. And then World War I, so you would figure, this is an inland city in China, So what does World War One have to do with Hankow? Fortunately, there was enough mail around to show that by then Hankow was an international city, and there was a lot of mail that were censored that went through Hankow. Now, it won't be this, the attraction of a lot of the cities in China was that it has at that time several foreign office, and the most important one was the British Post Office. So of course I have to spend a big chapter on that, while the other ones, the French, German, Japanese, and Russian, were of much lesser concern. And then I finished with an epilogue. So just for those people who don't understand the geography of it, Hankow is a complex. It's actually a tri-city, like Minnesota and so on, St. Paul. So it has Hankow, Wuchang, and Hanyang. Hanyang is where the seat of the government is and where the major industry, the steel milling. So on my title page, hyphen the double page, I'm showing the one item of each to show those are also under the radar, under the scope of this. Oh, by sheer coincidence, this is the first time I use the double page or tabloid format. Importance for somebody who doesn't know, especially, I am trying to get 1 or 2 points more on importance. I need to be really straightforward. A map, save 1,000 words. And the feedback from my judges who look at my title page is that yes, the map was important, because in here with the green lines, those are landline of the railroad connection to number one, of course, the capital, and the south part, which is Canton and Hong Kong, which was how a lot of mail went overseas. The other horizontal, the blue lines, is the importance of Hankow is that it was on the Yangtze, which is one of the 2 most important rivers in China, and probably the most important in terms of the artery of moving mail. So that would link Chongqing to Shanghai, and Hankow is the midpoint. I'm really trying to get my importance through so that the judges give me the points. So, I start with Forerunner. The first one, earliest one I could see is this 1860, and it's sent to the US. For those who know the history of US in Hankow, 1861 was the first settlement of US. So even though I have been unable to trace who the sender is, this is probably a precursor to the US negotiation to be able to establish a point in Hankow. And then I show other covers that was coming in from UK, France, and then much later, 1888, where the US consulate is well established in Hankow. I have a letter that was sent privately to Shanghai before it was shipped over. So the Forerunner covers ends with this 1891. This is where I choose to start my exhibit, 1891. So this particular cover is the letter is the most important because it tells of a really obscure incident that many people do not know about. Everybody may have heard of the Boxer Rebellion, but this particular incident, this anti-foreign missionary riot that was all around the Yangtze, was so-called the dress rehearsal for the Boxer Rebellion 9 years later. And this particular letter, usually from Hankow privately, it would take only probably a few days, maybe a week to get to Shanghai. But this one took a long time because of this. So this is where the exhibit start. Now, the earliest Chinese marking is the so-called Hankow, the custom Hankow marking. That this is the long stamp example in the whole exhibit, and I argue that why I put a stamp in a postal history exhibit is because of the cancel. It is the earliest custom Hankow marking. And while I'm showing the first one, that was so-called type 1, which has just the last 2 digits for year. The other one was an incoming cover, and it's the earliest of the Hankow marking of type 2, which has 4 digits. So here I'm showing you the earliest of the 2 known types of the custom offices. So this is where I start to argue again on my scope. Why, others would say, Sam, the customs started in 1870s or so. Even though you have the 1879 stamp, why are you not starting your exhibit from 1879? I argue with records. So on records, I have kept for 30 years from books, from auction catalogs, from whatever you have, that the first recorded cover was 1881. Now, that particular cover, the stamp was off. It was not of a quality that I could put in an exhibit. And then, the years, the line were 1880 and so on. I could show you many years that there was absolutely zero cover or cards recorded. And for those years that have one item recorded. So I argue, and I hope the jury agree with me, that it was relevant that I start, and it's meaningful, I only start in 1891. And then the other part of it, even though I said I start in 1891, but even from 1891 to 1896, there was actually very few items available, except between 1893 to 1896. All of a sudden, you have the Hankow local post office, which is a completely independent post office of the Chinese system, and those exist. So I was fortunate enough that I could have items of 1893 and 1894 to show. Now, those so-called mail matter is, if you were a staff working at the custom post office, you could send mail for free, and then they would stamp this custom Hankow mail matter, which allowed this material to go free. So here's these 2 covers. The second one, which I've highlighted 2 circle, that's the only one I have recorded that has 2 stripes. Now, going back to Hankow, a lot of people would think, Sam, you argue that Hankow is such an important city. Why are there so few items around, items that have survived? The reason is because, also because of its success. Hankow, a lot of people knows, they see a cover from Hankow, they would cut it out. They would just soak the stamp off and so on. So relative to other more exotic cities, the rate of survival of Hankow material is probably much lower than those more exotic cities. Then we come to Hankow local post with its 1893. I've been able to, luckily, I have been able to track a few very pretty good items. The one on the left, as you can see, this is the only one where, in 1893, you were using a wrong year slug, and it shows 1888. And the other one is, I was able to get there was no register marking yet of the Hankow local post. So the head post person, which is the postmaster, wrote in pen as register. So this particular cover is the earliest. And I, just for comparison's sake, I took another, of the handwriting off another cover to show you that this is probably a valid thing. So more of the Shanghai cover, and I was able to track a cover where it was just transiting. So this was incoming from the UK, went to Hong Kong, and then it went, probably overland to Hankow before it went to Yichang, and it has a stripe of the local post. Another cover, a couple of covers to Q Kang, and for a short time, the Hankow post office, Hankow local post office was using a red ink. So this was one of 6. So I want to end this with a big bang on the local post. And fortunately, I was able to get a cover where the Hankow local post in red marking here and the custom Hankow. This is the only one I have recorded because, and I don't know, I still cannot explain why the local post system went outside of the local post system. This was sent from Shanghai. It went on the local post system to Hankow, and then it was handed off to the custom post office. So I ended the Hankow part in here. For the first 6 months, where China become a national post office in 1897, there is debate on when the starting date is, and we now know February the 2nd was of 1897 is when they started. The National Post Office started to handle domestic mail, and where February 20th is the day that they started for international mail. I was fortunate. Well, I wasn't fortunate. I was looking for it. I was able to get the earliest, the second earliest, and the third earliest cover, which I'm showing here. So even though this was by then it was a Chinese post office, imperial post office, they were still using the old system, custom Hankow cancellation here. So there's 6 months of this, and the latest cover which I have was on June 24th. So after this, for American postal stationery collector, I need your confirmation if you have ever seen a postal stationery cover that was used from the Shanghai to Hankow. According to my records, because this is the lone example that I'm able to to see. So correct me if I'm wrong. Then comes the first cancellator. China didn't even have the means to make the good cancellator. They went to Japan to order it. It was supposed to be delivered in February. It didn't arrive until May, and in Hankow it got to use in July. So this was important. I have another exhibit just on this cancellator alone, just to compare. For example, the U.S. postal history and China postal history. This is probably a comparison of the early 1860s, So at this point in time in 1897, in China, there was only 27 post office. There was only 27 cancellators. And this is the one in Hankow. So I'm lucky to get one of the cards where this idea of subscriber and prepaid cover. China did not join the UPU until 1914. So any of China's stamps are not honored outside of China. So it's useless. You have to use UPU countries' stamps. So, if there was a system where you could go to the custom post office. By now, this is the Chinese Imperial Post, where you set up an account and you pay monthly on the domestic mail. And once you bring the cover in there, for example, this is a German card. They would honor the postage and forward it. So this so-called German postal stationery, in combination with the Hankow large CDS, this is the lone example, and it's the earliest one used in brown ink. And China started to have the first postal stationery in 1897, and I was able to get the one of the example, the earliest example I have seen from Hankow usage, a domestic one. So just this red band cover, the reason why I'm showing this is because before 1897, the post office was letting all the private post office do their business because there's no mean for them to compete. By 1897, royal decree came in, if you're ever caught delivering mail, you'll be punished. Postage will be punished. If you're using a boat, the boat will be confiscated and so on. So before the Chinese mail system was pay on delivery. So this particular marking, which says mail already paid in Hankow, the big deal here is Hankow, was showing you the transition from the Chinese experience of paying on delivery and a prepaid cover. So this was in 1897 or 1898, it was a fairly different new concept. So I continue with several items, a register cover, which is one of only two to New Zealand, and then one of two, which, as you can see, that I circle, where it should be the Chinese year on one end, they put the month, and where the month would be, it was blank. So this was a postage due cover. In my write-up, you could see that I argue why there was so few postage due items, because usually the sender has to be presented at the counter to pay for both postage. So usually there was extra handling on it. Therefore, the occurrence of postage due cover is really rare. And so this is this particular cover have several features. So then come at a certain time, I already mentioned that the domestic mail has to be paid with the Chinese postage. Then the external mail has to be paid with one of the UPU countries. So when the Chinese post office is there, they would put the foreign country's stamp on, and then it was sent usually to the next foreign office, which usually is a Shanghai corresponding office. For this one, it's the Shanghai IJPO, the Japanese Post Office. Now, doing transit, they found that a lot of the mail carriers was stealing the stamp. So they instigated meanwhile, the Chinese Post Office does not have the right to cancel a foreign stamp. So they gave decree to all the post offices, you start making this IPO, so-called IPO marking, and tie the stamp on it. If it get to the next point and the stamp was off and this marking is visible, the carrier would be penalized. So this, there was only 1 month where the large CDS and the occurrence of the first IPO marking was available. So I think there would be more. I have been tracking 30 years to try to find a second example, and I have failed. So this is, of course, sent to Montreal, really relevant to me. And this also gave me the chance to argue the importance again of Hankow, because this was tea. And I argue that, at that point in time, China, especially Hankow, was one of the key import-export city of tea, as you can see from this particular, report on the tea. A combination cover, this time using Chinese stamps and the postal stationery used to Hankow. So more of the IPO type print usage. There were supposed to be 3 different types, which I show. And these are very scarce animal, because Pearson, who did the evaluation of this, has been tracking, type 1, there's only 5 known. Type 2, there's only 5 known, and so on. Type 3, there's like 10 known, or I may have got it wrong. It's type 2, there's 10 known. So those are really scarce that we try to quantify. Now, this particular cover, which I put in, it should have an IPO type print, but it did not, because, before 1900, all mail has to have this IPO type print. So this is one of the errors, as I would say. So this is another part of the thesis where I have I have not published yet. Now, going back, China did not become a UPU country until 1914. But China was able to negotiate with the UPU countries and said, okay, could you accept my stamps? Of course, I would pay you special accounting to all the other post office that handle their mail. So on January the 1st, 1902, all Chinese stamps were honored. The covers do not need any other foreign post office stamps to be able to go elsewhere. However, in my exhibit, I have several examples that something happened between 1902 and 1903 where a Hong Kong stamp was accepted in, Wuchang, Hankow suburb, and was allowed to go through with no postage due. So this is probably some kind of a unpublished agreement between the Chinese post office, which then ended. And in 1903, I could show you the same thing with a Russian postcard that have a Russian stamp that was accepted in the Hankow Chinese post office. There was no postage due because if you get accepted in Chinese post office, you need the Chinese postage on it. So I was showing this. And then there was markings where there was absolutely no data on it. Those were issued to the third class or fourth class post office, which could be a postal drawer, only a drawer. So there's no import. They do not need date because they accept very few mail at that time. And then the stamp would be canceled at the next important post office, as you can see. So there's several. I'm showing this particular one because this in 1909, this particular marking, which says no damage. It doesn't mean no damage. It actually is camouflaging that it has been opened and censored. And the censor name is here. So in Hankow, I was able to track. I own both covers, so I have not seen the third one. I'm only showing one of them. So then comes the postal stationery. I already said I have the earliest one used in Hankow, which I've shown earlier with the large CDS. So this was the first printing. The second printing, single card and the double card, where it says double card in here. I saw both of them used from Hankow. This is an important one where this is the only third printing. One of the most scarce printing of postal stationery in China is the third printing. It has a major following on the third printing and really in demand. This particular one have an Hankow rectangular marking on it. So then I go with this particular, which is the bilingual marking, which you could see Hankow Chinese on top and English date. This started in 1899, May to be exact. I only have the second earliest cover, which is shown here. The earliest cover, I don't have. And, so I think this was important. The other thing is that for 30 years, I've been tracking the ink color of it. And this is the only one I've seen with the blue ink. So I haven't even seen a stamp off cover that has the blue ink. So, I've asked all the collectors, nobody has it, in this particular one. So then come the important thesis of my exhibit, which I say, guys, this is one post office that did an experiment. It tried to do something different. So the earliest marking I see is that all of a sudden on the rim, they cut the rim off and then put a little dot in here, 1900. Then nothing happened from 1900 to 1906, kind of. And this is arguable because, people say, oh, come on, Sam, this is just misinking. The year has been there. It is not, especially when you see that part of the frame has been cut off. So this is where I start to pinpoint from 1906 onwards that there is so many things that is happening. And I try to track it by the year that they're deliberately breaking this up. Now, you know, some of you may look at my entire exhibit and say, Sam, you were doing railroad track, sometimes 5 covers in a double page, 6 cover in a double page. Why all of a sudden in this particular area, you only have 4 items? Because sometimes using white is to emphasize the importance. That's what I was using. I wasn't clouding this because that is my thesis. I want to show those were the important pieces. Those were the errors. You know, judges, please look more at these. Those were the important items. So I started off with tracking this, you know, the broken parts. Then they put a dot in there, you know, 07, 08. Then they put, you know, all along to 1910, 1911. And then they start to put 2 dots in there, 3 bricks, and so on. So, you know, this gets boring, but, you know, this is where I have to show, you know, I'm tracking all of those. Then all of a sudden, they also play around with the year slot. So they put a 2 in here. You would say, oh, that was 1902 or 1912. It wasn't. It was 1910. So all the 2s and the 3s and the 4s and the 5s and the 6, they do not correspond to to the year. And then, of course, then more things happen, 7, and then by 1912, they even put a Chinese character on it. So, and then you go to 1914, they put then a double year, but the 14 does not correspond to the actual year of the 15. You know, so, you know, more stuff, you know, 44 in the 1960 cancel. So, and then they put blocks in it, yet, you know, 1, 3, 5, and so on. So I've been trying to establish this because there's absolutely no post office record of it. You know, this is 3 administrations ago. So, and then they have something where there's absolutely nothing broken. They just use a single year. So I try to use several examples again because, you know, because the critique would be saying, oh, it was only misinking. The one in before was not there. So I did all this until, you know, ended. And then the same thing, the so-called lunar marking. For those in 1904, all of a sudden, the bilingual markings, by then 1904, that the general Chinese population was picking up on using the post office. So the date, the year is so-called the lunar marking, usually by 2 Chinese characters, with 2 Chinese characters on it. And it evolved from the start of 1904 to 7. And then by 1911, they put English back in there. And the same thing happened where all of a sudden they put letters in there. This is probably, I would guess, is a different post office. Now, you know, then they put 1, they put 4, they put 4 on the same height as Hankow, they put 4 under the Hankow, 6, and so on. So, and then the same so-called errors, they weren't errors, they were deliberate because I think the post office staff was really clever in doing this because they want to differentiate who is applying the cancel, because if somebody make a mistake, they have to pay for it. Okay, then comes the Xinhai Revolution. I made a gamble in this one too, because to me, the postcard, the visual were very important. This is one of the earliest documented revolutions that we could see in postcard. Now, for every postcard, those are all used and in period. So I argue that, because I know the history of the Xinhai, that it was because the privatization, the government come in and privatize the railroad. So the merchants was up in arms because it was a Belgium company that owns the railroad that started. And this particular the Hanyang iron, this smelter, it was the one and only smelter in China at that time. And the major thing they did was rail. So I was trying to use the big postcard and the small, and only the small backing, which shows the usages. So again, more of the postcards showing the burning of Hankow. And one of the evolution here is the lunar marking. Within 1 week or so, it got from the lunar marking to here where it says Republic First Year. So this was what I call the ex-lunar marking. They took the lunar marking and they changed it to the Republic First Year. And this was prepared, this was a sensor marking prepared for use, only recorded on 2 CTO cards, 2 days on CTO cards and covers. I ended again with more images of the damages and a cover that was sent to Vice President Lai, who was in Hanyang at that time. And so now World War One, I was able to have material for, not quite a frame, but I choose to only show 2 rows of it as, give you examples that from the the Japanese POWs to France incoming, to a cover that was from the UK and so on, to UK coming in, UK sent to UK, and then it was forwarded. And in the exhibit, I show 3 different type of US sensor in mail on Hankow. So comes the most important post office in Hankow, which was a British post office. I mean, I hate to admit it, but the earliest marking at one point I used to own, but in my younger days, I was stupid enough to put it in auction, and and it's sold, so I don't own it anymore. But I argue 1891 as a starting year because it was a start date of a very important, the 5th UPU rate in Hong Kong, and the postal and the Treaty Port Office, where they had 10 cents going everywhere, and then all of a sudden after 3 months they would bring it down to 7 cents. So this particular stamp was just made for that purpose, and there's only one of 2 that are recorded using Hankow. Now this particular, because of the confusion, this cover sent to Italy was only pay 7 cents, but the postal clerks were so confused that they let it go. The rate should be 10 cents. Now this is the long item, the parcel post from a shipment of tea of 9 pounds. This is the long example. I have broadcasted in the Hong Kong collecting world, and it's confirmed. That's a long example. Now we have now found 5 items from the treaty port with this the only custom decoration forms. The big deal about
Sam, sorry to interrupt you. I just want to let you know we have about 15 more minutes left, and that includes time for questions. Okay.
Yes, got it. I know. Yeah, okay. So let's finish off British Post Office. Now, the big deal with British Post Office is its registration marking. Now, fortunately, I have the earliest known of this circular marking, and then it become a black ink marking, which is Hankow on the top, BPO, and purple. So this is the lone post office where it has the black marking, the purple marking, and then it was put on a label. So I then use 1 row because I've recorded less than 10 postage due markings on the British Post Office, and I was showing 4 of it. So just to show you the rest of the postal stationery, the person who kept this a record of it was of course the famous Edward or Ted Prowl. So you could see at the bottom of it, a lot of them he has not recorded use in Hankow. Well, roughly 80% of what I'm showing, he has not recorded. So, and then French post office. And I just want to show a couple of them. This particular one is important because it was sent to Hankow, and then it went back to Shanghai. But this shows that there was a no missent marking at the French post office. Another one, World War One. This is pretty scarce. Now, then we have the German post office, which I show selected example of this, and then the Japanese post office. It has something like 3 markings and then 2 varieties. As in, you can read from my exhibit that you can identify if it's purple, it probably was rubber. If it's black, it's probably steel. And of course, a scarcer one is the Denmark World War One marking. So the Russian post office, I argue that this particular one, 1900, it was sent from Russia. It did not went through the Russian post office because it wasn't, Trans-Siberian wasn't open. It was much later. I show a couple of register covers, where, this particular label Russian. The other one was then covered with a bilingual English and French marking. Now, I ended with the exhibit by doing this. I want to justify the scope. I argue that by 1919, World War One has ended. A lot of the post office are going to be closed. The German one have closed in 1970 and so on. So the big deal with Hankow, there was no big deal except for one thing. It was the gunboat diplomacy. And I show a 1920 card from Monokesi that they're saying I was in Hankow. So this was the only story that was continuing on. And I show a 1922, just before the British post office closed, that a blue stripe was a purple stripe. This was unrecorded. So thank you. 18. So.
Well, that was an exceptional presentation. Thank you so much, Sam. At this time, we're going to open it up for questions. If you would like to ask a question, you can go down to the reaction button at the bottom. And if you click on that, there'll be a raise hand. You can click that and I'll see you. And I can take care of you there. If you can't find that image, you can, or that raise hand thing, you can also go to the chat function. Type in whatever, just type in your name and it'll appear on the chat board and I'll recognize you at some point during our Q&A session here. So I see that the first person up is Bob Reynolds. So Bob, if you'd like to unmute yourself, you go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, Sam, question. How was the mail to and from Hankow mainly transported? It sounds like a lot of it went by boat. Was it down the river to the coastline to Shanghai? Or was there a rail system in place, or was there like a Pony Express version?
It depends. It depends on what time it is. The underwriting is there is so much. I argue in my exhibit that the reason why there were so few mail that went through was there was a lot of private companies that would just collect mail and they would put it in boats because there must be dozens of boats going from Hankow upriver to Chongqing or downriver to Shanghai. So that's why a lot of the mail business was stolen before 1897. So yes, a majority of it would have gone through. But however, you go back to the first cover I show, 1860, that probably went wire overland. And now the railroads didn't start to, they were being built in the late 1890s. So they were not functioning until the early 1900s. However, but there is, because it is like it's the center of China, so there's a lot of movement on even overland without rail from Hankow to Canton, lots of it, because those are two major centers, Canton and so.
The other thought I had is you had the variable numbers on the postmarks, and I'm just wondering, just by chance, maybe if it was an employee number or designated a certain time of day.
Probably all of the above. We don't have any documentation. I tried to track it. They're not that common. Like I said, Hankow suffer from this syndrome that always a common post office. I'll soak the stamp off. So, exceedingly, large amount of items were supposed, to have survived, hasn't. And obviously there is no record. But we know it's definitely used. It wasn't an accident. It was by design. And for identification. Yes, yes, yes. So probably post office, probably staff. Just to add on this is because in the China psyche, for example, even in Hong Kong, if a postal clerk lose their cancellator with their number on, they have to call the police to report it. Okay? When you go to a bank, you could sign your name, but you need to have this little chop, your name chop, to sign a check. So this Chinese psyche of a chop or the stamp is very important. So, and back then is especially important where if something is wrong, who's going to take the blame? So identification, if we put our brains back to that time, then we realize that this is important, because who's going to hold the bag, and that's why this is all, but unfortunately, I tried to record as much as I can, but I haven't been able to find anything, certain, because take a look at how many varieties on that, broken frame, single year, different time, different years. So
The answer is probably sitting in some obscure magazine or
Could be.
newspaper, something stamp related, and there'll be a story about it. Somebody's diary.
one day, one day.
Yeah.
I hope, yeah.
Thank you. Very good presentation.
Thank you, Bob.
So do we have any other questions for Sam? Any other questions? Yes, Michael.
Yes, Sam. Coming back to those cancelers with all sorts of cutouts and additions, initially you mentioned that the canceller had come from Japan very early on. With that many cancelers that you showed, were they made in Hankow? Was
The only canceller was that really large CDS, and it was only 1897. And for some reason, the ink that they use have some corrosive. Those were brass items, and it corroded quite badly. And as you can see from my exhibit, I could identify two different versions of it. For offices like Shanghai and so on, where they have 3 markings, in the later marking, you can't see the words. It corroded so much. So after 1899, they did not go outside. Everything was homemade. So they were able to make it there, And knowing that, where the major iron ore center is in Hankow, this is probably where they made the cancels. And they were able to do things where the other city wouldn't be able to do,
Yeah, what I'm getting at is that if they were made locally, then maybe you could get lucky and find the company that did it. And heaven knows, maybe they're records.
Maybe.
Can always hope.
Yeah, we hope. Thanks, Michelle.
You're welcome. I had another point, if nobody else. Sam, you're an academic, and for heaven's sakes, when you were explaining this, I could see a lecture going on history. Are you at all thinking of publishing this with extra information? Here's the covers, and here's the background, here's the history. It would make a wonderful, wonderful book. It's always gotten to me that at the level that you are exhibiting and many others are exhibiting, we're at the level of academia and we're not being recognized for it.
Michelle, the first time I wrote about this was 2000 even, 20 millennium, year of the millennium. Nobody cared. I then wrote about 2020. I'm talking to people who have no response. So I'm talking to myself. So I ask myself, does anybody care? So sorry, but
well, there's 16 people sitting here who care.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for showing up on Mother's Day.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Sam.
I would like to reiterate what Michelle just said. It was outstanding history lesson. I mean, China
Thank you.
is an area that I don't know very well at all. I'm an academic by nature too, and I've always found it, curious that you could have a numismatist at a university, but you really can't have a philatelist at a university.
Yeah, I try to talk about,
Mhm.
linking postal history to real history, that
Yeah.
these are, in fact, artifacts. These are historical artifacts.
Yeah, they are.
But it is just over their head. Nobody understands. They have no idea that
Right.
this is history. This is,
Well,
Yeah.
I can remember one time, Sam, when you were doing the China Corps in World War I. Do I have that name right?
Chinese
You
Labor
had-
Corps.
In World War I, you had gone back to the city where a good number of these people came from, and you were able to expose to the local people the history that they had forgotten.
They have no idea. In 2006, I went back to Weihai, where they started, and I was talking to the municipal archives. They have no idea. They absolutely have no idea. But fortunately, that got caught on. So there was 2 international conferences after that, which I attended, so that was good. That feels good because people have listened, people have cared. So
Well, it seems we've come to about the end of our time. Sam, if I could give you a large gold for this presentation, I would make 2 for the show. Anyway, PIPEX would like to thank everyone for participating in this presentation, and a special thanks to Sam. There are 2 more remaining PIPEX seminars today. The next one is actually going to be the Grand Award for single frames, if you're interested. So again, thanks to Sam and everyone, and I hope you have a great PIPEX show. Take care.
thank you.